There is usually something else going on alongside an eating disorder, some mental illness. There was one person in particular that was very influential to me throughout my childhood, and that person had an eating disorder and also a very difficult mental illness. And watching that person and learning from that person definitely had an effect on me. For me, I dealt with a lot of PTSD, and I still do. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, I dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety, and it's hard to know which came first, the eating disorder or the PTSD, because they both kind of seem to happen all at once, you know? And I know some people that have been through some truly horrific childhoods. Like, I think about the book A Child Called It, and I realize that my childhood was nowhere near that bad, but I still went through and was exposed to things that children should never have to. I started overeating at age 10, and it had become a full-blown binge eating disorder by the time I was 11 years old. As a teenager, I remember just looking at celebrities and even like the popular girls at school and just wishing so badly that I could look like them. Throughout all of my teenage and adolescent years, I truly thought that in order for me to ever be happy, I needed to be thin and sexy. I didn't realize that my depression and anxiety were deeply rooted in PTSD because of the traumas that I had experienced. I wasn't unhappy because I was overweight, which I wrongfully assumed. I was unhappy because I had been through some shit. I was jaded. But there was definitely a lot of depression that was going on alongside my eating disorder. But a lot of the depression was made worse because of the isolation. By isolating myself, I was digging my pit of depression deeper and deeper. I isolated because I didn't want to binge in front of people or eat at all in front of people. And I also just didn't like the way I looked. So therefore, I didn't want to be seen by anyone. When I was around people, I would always cover my body. Like, I was self-conscious about my legs, so I never wore shorts to school, even when I lived in a very hot climate. And I never wore tank tops or tight clothing or anything like that either. As a matter of fact, I would wear like jackets or hoodies or stuff like that, like whenever I could. All of the isolation and insecurities also made it so that I had very poor social skills. I had very little experience in social settings, so I simply did not know what was normal or not. Throughout my teen years and my 20s, I embarrassed myself or came across as a jerk quite a few times because I simply did not know better. My self-esteem was just so low, like all through my 20s as well. And being very insecure is never attractive. So yeah, it usually didn't go well in social settings. So yeah, the PTSD and the eating disorder kind of went hand in hand because I would isolate because I had an eating disorder, you know, to hide that behavior and to just hide that part of myself. But I would also isolate because I was depressed, but then it was like this vicious cycle. And so the eating disorder fed the PTSD and the depression and anxiety that went along with that. And then the PTSD and the depression and anxiety kind of fueled the eating disorder, and they just fed off of each other. So it was kind of hard for me, like I said, it was kind of hard to know like what was causing what. And I just feel like it was all just a jumble. And yeah, my whole life was pretty much just throughout my teenage years and my 20s, it was just defined by this mental illness that I was battling, the PTSD and all the depression and anxiety that went along with that, and my eating disorder. But anyway, back to the binge eating. So a lot of times I wouldn't even know that I was binge eating until it was over. It would start out with a negative feeling, whether it be loneliness or stress, depression, anxiety, exhaustion, laziness, boredom, whatever I would be feeling at that moment. And I would usually start hating myself and just wishing that I could have a break from my life and or just being me. And so I would use food as a way to escape and make myself feel better. Once I started eating, I would basically just kind of shut down and tune out. I would basically just go into autopilot mode and become numb. And it would start with just one cookie from a package, and then half the package, and then the whole package, and then the next thing, and so on. So sometimes I would even like justify it by saying that, like, well, I'll just eat all the junk food, because then once it's gone, then like I can't eat anymore and I can't be tempted. So it like almost became the noble thing to do, to just eat it all and get it out of sight, which honestly makes no sense, because there's always more food. And even when the food is gone, there's always more where it came from. So yeah. And you know, binge eating is so different from overeating. Like when a person overeats, they have a choice. Like it's Thanksgiving or a social event, and they choose to eat a little more than usual, you know? But binge eaters don't have a choice. They have no control over their binge eating. And like I would also eat like really, really quickly, like not even tasting or registering what I was eating. And I feel like that's the difference too, because, you know, a lot of people are overeating, but they're like really like, they're still mindful, you know, they're still tasting what they're eating and appreciating what they're eating. And there's no shame or guilt involved, you know? I mean, maybe to an extent, you know, maybe like when you have to like loosen your belt after Thanksgiving dinner, you know, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that second slice of pie, or, you know what I mean? But like, it's just different with binge eating. The immense, like overpowering shame and guilt that you feel, it's not just like, oh, you know, maybe I shouldn't have eaten that much, but like you feel it on like at a core level, like there's something wrong with you, you know, fundamentally wrong with you. Even now, I still struggle with my eating disorder at times. It just doesn't define me and my everyday life anymore. But I still turn to food sometimes during times of stress or depression or boredom or loneliness. And if I'm not being self-aware and practicing self-care, then I can easily fall into old habits of self-medicating with food, or at least being tempted to. I think someone can hear binge eating and they think that it's always somebody that is obese, even morbidly obese, and that's not always the case. Binge eating is more about your patterns and behaviors with your eating and your feelings surrounding food, and it's not always discernible from the outside. So it's really nice to have a partner or a close loved one who truly understands and can support you on your journey. There is usually at least one other mental illness that is causing or coexisting with an eating disorder. So it's so important to have a partner who understands all the different factors involved with your specific situation and all the triggers and all the different ways to be supportive and to be teammates along your journey.